To use the words of Bentov, we enter, in effect, a new world.
Welcome to the Biosphere. Here to enhance your journey of discovering organizational ecosystems design. Your program will commence shortly. Thank you.
All right, so welcome to the Biosphere. Here we're exploring the subject of organizational ecosystems design. My name is Idris Bernard, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Mr. Greg Sarafin, the Global Alliance and Ecosystem Leader for the EY Consulting Group. Mr. Sarafin, it's a pleasure to have you on, sir, and I'll let you introduce yourself a bit more and give us a bit of context about who you are and what it is that you do.
Well, thanks for having me. As you said, I'm Greg, and for the last 9 years, I've been a partner with EY. The last 6 years, I've been responsible for EY's partner ecosystem. So all of the business we do together in the market with partners of all types. And I was telling somebody recently that I actually sold my first deal more than 40 years ago. I was still in college, just to be clear.
Yeah.
I'm not that old, but oldish. And I sold my first deal to actually help pay for college.
Nice.
And so my career has been primarily technology. I was an engineer. I was a trained engineer back in the early 80s when you could build them and program them. And I have done either consulting tech-related roles or executive management tech-related roles for the 40 years. And when people ask me if I'm ready to retire, my answer is no. I am only 2/3 of the way through my career.
Still got a lot left.
Still got a lot left.
So
a lot left to go.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. So where did you grow up? Where are you originally from? Kind of what was that environment like for you?
I grew up in the United States, the Northeast. I was born in Philadelphia the day before President John F. Kennedy was assassinated, if you know your history.
Wow. Yep.
Yeah, I'm a baby boomer. That's right. Hey, millennials and Zs out there.
Are you an Eagles fan? I'm assuming.
I live and die by the Eagles, my friend. Absolutely. So, Philadelphia sports fan in general. I also went to college at the University of Pennsylvania, right in West Philadelphia. Right. So, and lived in Philadelphia my first year out of college. But really, I was raised in a town just outside of Princeton, and I raised my family in another town just out of Princeton University. So,
great. Okay.
So we're midway between Philly and New York, if you know your geography.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up comfortably middle class. Parents had a focus on education, and raised my kids similarly. And I figured out I was a technology geek when I was pretty young. I was probably in my early teens when I got my first access to a computer and did my obligatory Hello World program in BASIC. Yeah. Those of you that remember that era of technology, it's a little different now with ChatGPT and everything else, but back then it was a little more simple. Yeah. So, as I said, I became very technology and engineering focused. Got my undergraduate degree in engineering.
Right.
So I got a degree where we had to be able to both build a microcomputer as well as do all the programming of all the layers of the stack. So I'm pretty good fundamentals of computing and technology going back 40 years. And like I said, it's been technology related one way or another throughout my career, although there's always been a business aspect to it as well.
Right. No, that makes sense. Yeah, that's good. You started early and got into it and everything like that. And so I know you mentioned you went to UPenn, did computer science and engineering, I believe, in the 80s. And what was that sort of space like during that time? What kind of problems were you guys working on? What was sort of the sentiment towards like the future of technology that you were feeling towards? What was a young Mr. Greg Sarafin doing at that time in the 80s?
Well, the early 80s was definitely a unique time if you weren't around, but it was a time of optimism perhaps faulty optimism, but it was certainly a time of optimism. From a technology perspective, it was exciting. It
Yeah.
was very exciting because it was really, I would call it, the age of democratizing technology. Up through the 70s, access to technology was really big corporations that could afford compute, because compute was really, really expensive back then. It was mainframes and then mini computers. It was the late 70s when microcomputers first hit hobbyists,
Hmm.
uh, and that Apple kind of made microcomputers available to people in their homes with the Apple II. And so this is before the Macintosh, by the way,
Yeah.
for that architecture. That architecture didn't come out until the mid 80s, but in the mid 70s, Apple came out with a microcomputer for home use. And then it was in 1981, when I was a freshman in college, that IBM announced the IBM PC
Mm.
and created the microcomputer wave that, we still are, in some ways enjoying today. The laptop, the Dell laptop I'm talking to you on, is really a direct descendant of that technology 40 years ago, right?
Yeah.
It's an Intel chip and et cetera. So it was a time when, and it's also a time when technology was approachable. You could literally buy the tooling and buy the chips to make your own computer, right?
Okay.
You could be a hobbyist, and you could, buy all the bits and pieces you need to make your own computer.
Yeah.
If you didn't want to pay for an IBM PC or any of the HP or other brands that followed quickly after IBM announced and started shipping. So, it was. I tell you, I could not have imagined 40 years ago just how far technology has gotten. The power of modern technology infrastructure is astounding. It's like something out of what I would have considered science fiction
Yeah.
back when I was young and learning engineering. Uh, and also, I guess in some ways today, kids in college have immediate access to unlimited computing.
Yeah.
Back when I was in college, even then, with PCs and with time sharing we had a UNIVAC system at the university, which is now Unisys. It was time sharing.
Yeah.
To do programming, I was in the lab in the middle of the night, getting unlimited
Right.
time on terminals to do my projects, right? So it was a very different era, because compute was still a scarce resource.
Yeah. Of course. Of course.
Right? Not as scarce as it had been the previous decade, but it was not. It wasn't like I could go on the Azure, buy an account, and then have infinite computing and infinite data and infinite everything else effectively like we do today. But it was exciting. It was enjoyable. You could see the possibilities. You could see where things were going. You don't, unless you were a futurist, though. I don't know that you would have seen that 40 years later we're here where we are today.
Yeah. Yeah. I would imagine that it's very hard to sort of uh conceptualize at that stage, yeah, where we are today, and just seeing the sort of genesis of it, and seeing just how fast it's evolving and everything like that. um did did that, I know you're talking about IBM and building your computers and everything that you're working on in college. Did that sort of, is that what drove you towards to work with IBM? I know you have some experience with IBM
Well, it's a
previous.
funny story, IBM. So when I entered college, my intent was to get an undergraduate and then a master's in computer science engineering, and then go work for IBM.
Mhm, mhm.
That was the plan.
Yeah.
But as you learn in life, the plan is rarely what happens when you actually get out on the field of play, right?
Yeah.
Same in sports. So I think I told you I sold my first deal. So what happened is I got so enamored with selling my own consulting and technology. I guess you'd call it technology outsourcing work today on a very small scale. I got so into it and enjoyed it so much that I didn't go to IBM and I didn't get a master's degree. I actually finished up and I started my own business.
Nice.
And so I did that for 13 years. And, it went through various iterations.
Yeah.
Started out, like I said, doing, another term will age me. Everybody today, when you network, you buy a computer and networking's built into it. It's like, you don't even think about it. It's like
Right.
water in your house, right? But well, in the early 80s,
That was
networking wasn't resident in the computer, right? You had to buy a separate piece of software to set up a network. And the software that dominated the industry back then was from a company called Novell, which is
mm,
now an interesting, part of our history in the technology realm. A
yeah.
guy named Ray Norda, who, by the way, created the term coopetition, which, since we're going to be talking about partner regulator, is kind of an
Yeah.
interesting tie-in, right?
Yeah.
But it turned out his belief of coopetition was not Microsoft's belief of coopetition, and he ultimately paid the price by going out of business. But not before creating an amazing company that unlocked a lot of value. And so I started my career doing Nobel Network, helping small companies set up networks so they
Mhm.
could take these PCs that they had bought to get productivity and network them together to do even more productive things, right?
Right.
Which, again, today we're like, well, duh, everything's connected,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
not really. And then I should have switched into, after that became sort of a big players realm, I switched into doing custom software development, business applications, uh, for first small, medium enterprises. And then I started coming up to doing large custom projects for large enterprises.
Okay.
So the business for 13 years sort of meandered, through a number of things that I would sell to clients. But you know, I one of the things I learned during that period of time is I'm really, good at certain things, but other things I'm not so good at. And one of the things I've learned in my career, at least the first half of my career, is I'm really good at taking big things and making them humongous. I'm
Mm,
not so good at taking tiny things and making them less tiny, right?
mhm.
I'm not the startup person necessarily.
Yeah.
I am the person that's I'm the scaling person. And
Yeah.
so later in my career, I figured that. The second half of my career, I guess I figured that out. Uh, but the first half of my career, like I said, 13 years, had my own business. And then I did another years where I did a startup with a group of people in the healthcare space,
Mhm.
which turned out to be it was one of those things that sounded like a great idea. And even if I pitched it today, I might say, oh, that sounds like a really good idea. But the lesson learned on that one is make sure you understand the regulatory environment into which you are building a business,
Definitely.
because it makes a big deal. It makes a big difference on whether your business model will work or not. And we basically had a business model that was misaligned with regulatory requirements, which we didn't figure out that we'd burn millions of capital and a lot of our career time building this business. But anyway, that was a very important and expensive lesson learned. And then it was after that, after 16 years working in the small world, that I switched over to the large world.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. 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 That's a challenging lesson. I'm sure the healthcare industry too. I mean, it's regulations is crazy, like just way different and everything like that.
Well, our business model, I won't bore everybody with it, but not only was it healthcare regulated, it was also banking regulated.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So
It's
we had twin towers of regulation that, like I said, there was a thing regulatorily that tripped us up, and after 3 years, that wasn't we couldn't overcome it in the business model that we had. So today we would say we would had to make a pivot, right? That's the term today, but back then there were no pivots. We were kind of done after we figured that out. So anyway,
uh,
it was a good lesson learned.
that's a good lesson. Yeah, and it's exactly what I was going to ask you was, I mean, with your experiences and everything in the past, I'm sure obviously you've had a number of challenges. And so I was wondering what type of challenges, or is there a particular challenge that you sort of went through that you still take those lessons to apply to what you're doing today? Could be anything, school, relationships, personal, work, anything like that.
Well, I think first of all, you need to when you're young, you need to be honest with yourself about your Venn diagram,
Mm.
right? So, and specifically the intersection of what you love So what you're passionate about, what you're good at, and what you can get paid for,
Mhm.
right? So, right, meaning that you have the skills to get paid for whatever that is, right? So, um, ideally, you navigate your career to the intersection of those three things, right? And
Ikigai, concept of ikigai, I think, is a Japanese
is
concept.
a, is what it's called, ikigai. So, yeah, I think I've heard that term. I didn't know that's what it was, but so you know, like I said, I learned sort of the hard way that I'm good at large enterprise, scaling large enterprise larger. I don't like to get bogged down in the details of, when you run a small company or startup, everybody has to wear a lot of hats and do a lot of sort of, I'll call them non-core value creation things just to be able to operate the business. And I find that I do better if those things are not really on my plate and I can really just focus on, whatever the business strategy and value creation and then execution is. That was one of the lessons learned. And then of course you've already figured out that make sure you know regulation really well, which now being at a big four firm, I really know
Yeah.
regulation now because I deal with regulation every single day in my current role, quite significantly, as a matter of fact. And then, I think another lesson learned is, you know, if you're going to start your own business, uh, which I did in college, somewhat out of necessity, but um, recognize that you still need mentors and you still need people that have been through the cycle a few times. And when you start your own business young, without having worked in a big company and seen all of the elements of what makes a mature company work, right? All the different functions of the company, marketing, sales and revenue, tax, finance,
Wow.
technology,
It's a lot.
right? Right. When you look at a modern, company, there's all these functions of a company and understanding what those functions are, why they exist, and how they all interact with each other, and then how business processes flow through the different functions of the company. That's something that's extremely important to understand in the business world.
Yeah, definitely.
And, so if you have an opportunity coming out of college before you start your own business, today I would recommend that you work for a mature company, not a huge company, but a big enough, mature enough company that you can see how all these functions in a company work and understand all those mechanisms that bring the company together to operate effectively. And also, frankly, to give you a sense of where in the corporate world, your strengths lie. Are you more on the marketing and creative side? Are you more on the go-to-market side and revenue? Are you more on the operations side, whether it's tech operations or business operations? Like where, learning those things. So those are the sort of the three lessons I would say that I've learned in my time in my career that if I could go back and talk to a young version of me, those would be some of the advice points I would make.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, if you're saying, yeah, if you said you sort of had to do what you had to do out of necessity at that time and everything like that, it's so it has a way of working itself out, and it ended up working out well for you. And I think that sort of sometimes just being in the place of necessity where you have to make things happen, you're gonna grow in a more profound way than perhaps taking a little bit less risk. But it's good that you did that. It sounds like you got a lot of lessons from that.
Yeah, no, you make a good point, right? Because it was a bit out of necessity, right? When you have to close a deal to feed yourself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's it's a really important lesson,
Yeah, definitely.
right? Not everybody gets that lesson, and uh, and not everybody has the skills. Going back to that Venn diagram to close deals, right? To sell and convince somebody to make a buying decision that would result in a sale. So the but what I tell people, and here's probably another lesson I've learned in life, right? Um, the world runs on belief,
Yeah.
right? That's how the human brain is constructed. when we talk about facts, what we're really talking about is a lot of us believe the same thing to be true. That's
Yeah.
what a fact is. And certain facts, like scientific facts, are also repeatable and provable over and over and over again, very
Right.
consistently. But generally speaking, when we talk a fact, we're talking about a shared belief. And so, you know, for a very long time in my career, I believed that the quantifiable output that you produced, plus, not being a jerk, right, being a nice human being, working well with people, for the most part, those two things alone are sufficient to carry you and to help you advance your career. But really, the because of the way we are as human beings, there's another piece that's really important, which is people have to. It's not enough for you to believe you had an impact. You need to make sure that other people around you believe you had an impact,
Yeah.
right? Which means they need to receive what you've done not as numbers in a spreadsheet alone, but also as some sort of tangible, emotional, like, oh, Greg, you did something that's really valuable and it helped me and it helped our colleagues, it helped our clients, it helped our stakeholders, right? So don't assume that you can just create value in a vacuum. You
Yeah.
need to also get the people around you for whom that value then is important to believe in the value of what you've done and to believe in you as a colleague or as a provider of services, et cetera. So, and it's not so much, I mean, I guess you could put it in the bucket of selling, right? But really, I think it's more fundamental than just selling. It is making sure that if you believe you're creating value, the stakeholders that value matters to, both in terms of consuming the value and then also rewarding you for the value, believe in their own terms,
Mm.
not your terms, but in their own terms, in that value. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people miss that. I certainly missed that early in my career. And because of the way I'm wired, I am very much oriented to what I call quantifiable value creation. And sometimes I'll over-index on that versus more of the aligning the belief of stakeholders around the value that's been created.
Yeah, because it's kind of like what you were saying about beliefs and facts. If one person sort of believes that they're creating value, and then there's that gap between the stakeholder, whoever else that you're providing it to, they miss out on what you're trying to communicate and the value that you're trying to provide as a person or individual. Then there's a sort of lapse of understanding where they don't really understand the value that you're bringing, and it just kind of maybe like creates a headache or a miscommunication or frustration for people. Um,
Well, it can certainly create conflict and friction, to your point, but the more fundamental thing it does is it creates a misalignment of your expectations with how they react to the value you create or you believe you create. Again, it's belief, right? And it's those sorts of mismatches that create tension in the system, right? And frankly create dissatisfied employees. I mean, why do people leave? Sometimes they leave because they can get more money somewhere else to do the same thing, but mostly they leave because they don't feel valued in whatever job they're doing for whatever company. And part of that is on them, right?
yeah,
In
yeah,
many cases, not recognizing they're not communicating the value and they're not realizing that the stakeholders that matter around them that are supposed to be validating their value need to be able to understand their value in the terms that matter to them.
no, that makes sense. No, that makes absolute sense. Um, okay, well, these are some great points. I want to transition a little bit into ecosystems, alliance, partnerships, everything like that. So if you could just provide a little bit of context, and explain what is an organizational ecosystem, how would you define a sort of ecosystem, and why is it valuable in today's business landscape? Yeah.
Well, let me start with the word ecosystem, I actually started using the word ecosystem about 5 years ago in my role at EY. I'd taken over 6 years ago. I took over what at the time was called the alliance function
Hmm.
of the firm. It wasn't even a function back then. It was sort of like a concept. And I realized early on that alliance was sort of an old concept and really didn't sort of articulate well the power of what the what the function was capable of doing for the company.
Hmm.
And so I started using the word ecosystem, and even when I posted on LinkedIn, when I wrote articles, that was consistently what I used. And then I realized that using that word was confusing to people
Hmm.
because most people, their introduction to the word ecosystem was probably in school. You probably had this experience as well. And you were probably in science class, the ecology class to be
Yeah.
specific, and you were talking about the ecosystem of the ocean or the ecosystem of the desert. And of course, an ecosystem occurs naturally, and it is basically describes the balance between all of the participants in a closed system, right? And when that balance gets tipped one way or another, it affects all of the participants in the ecosystem, right? So in ecology, if the bees die, a lot of other things die too, right? Right. Things in an ecosystem don't live in an ecosystem in isolation. They're all dependent on each other. It's a giant codependency, right? And so that was confusing to people because I actually meant something else. What I really meant was partnering at scale
Hmm.
and the portfolio of partners with whom you as a company work with to create net new types of value that you as a company alone cannot create.
Yeah.
So then I created a definition I called a business ecosystem, and I wrote about it. And so I tried to, bring that definition in and also make it more concrete. So I created that term, business ecosystem, and that helped certainly. But ecosystem is still one of those words like digital.
Yeah.
People hear it and they're like, it's just like,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel good, right? So um, what I do now is I don't use the word ecosystem. I use the word ecosystem in the context of, yes, we have a bunch of partners that we work with at our company,
Yeah.
and all those partners together are our partner ecosystem,
Got it.
right? And we have a dependency on those partners, and they have a dependency on us. It's not 100% dependency, but it's becoming a very, very important dependency that we have on each other, and it is a dependency that we've purposely created. So unlike an ecosystem in nature, or even in an industry, right? So, if you read some of the latest stuff from analysts like IDC, they talk about industry ecosystems,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is this idea that, in the life sciences, for you and I to get a new cancer drug, for example, yes, there's a pharma company that ultimately brings that to market and spends billions of dollars getting it through the regulatory approval process. But there are all these other companies that are part of that life sciences ecosystem. They're also participatory in some form or fashion, usually as suppliers, right? You've heard supply chain or value chain, right? So those ecosystems do exist. And so that's why I've sort of been getting further and further away from ecosystem and describing what I do and, how I think about value creation in the modern world.
Mhm.
And so you hear me shift the dialogue now from ecosystem to partnering
Okay.
and to orchestration,
Got it.
right? That's because orchestration is a purposeful sort of a business activity. I'm orchestrating value creation with other companies. We're working together to orchestrate new types of value. And by doing that, we are combining our capital. So it is very much a shared capital model. And it's not just our money, although that's part of it. It's our people, right? We bring our people together with their people.
Yeah.
It's our innovations. We have our innovations. They have their innovations.
Right.
It's our IP that we have ours. They have theirs. It's our brand permission. We have permission in the market as a trusted provider of services of all types, as exercising good judgment, etc. But we might have a technology partner that has a brand permission of safe, scalable technology that's very consumable and usable, right? So combining those two things together is shared capital, right? So, and there are other types of shared capital as well. So when we look at, any business, let's take a step back to business fundamentals, right? Any business, in order to continue to evolve, grow, and be relevant in the market, has got to deploy capital to create new value, right? And every business has, a certain amount of capabilities that it deploys operationally. So operational expense or OpEx, right? So this is the run the business, as some people call it, right? And then there's the grow the business, which is typically capital allocations or capital expense, CapEx, right? And so, historically, if you ever took a business class in college, you probably at one point took a class that talked about, when you're thinking about deploying capital, do you build, do you buy, or do you partner? Build, buy, partner. You've heard that, I'm sure. And so, those are all capital decisions, right? And historically, most companies have partnered, but in a very limited way. Because up until now, we're going to go back to the discussion we had to start this call, right? I could not have imagined 40 years ago the state of technology today. But one of the upshots of the state of technology today, that the ability for two or more companies to create something new together that's really valuable, is incredibly fast and incredibly cheap relative to what it was even 10 years ago. So the economics, the very fundamental economics of partnering, have changed because of modern technology.
Right.
The hurdle costs and the operational cost of companies doing things together, having intercompany processes and creating assets that are integrated for an end client to consume, that cost is gone darn near to zero. And now you add generative AI and the other types of AI into the stack, and it's gone even more crazy, right? So, if you go back to build, buy, partner, most companies deployed most of their capital allocation to building, so R&D and innovation, designing stuff and prototyping it and then building it themselves. Or, okay, let's go out and buy a company that has things that we need to get into a particular market. So that's also capital. I'm using capital to buy it versus capital to build it. But other than in very narrow, constrained ways, most companies did not deploy a lot of capital to partnering. Yeah. And if they did, it was, again, in a very specific way. If you're in the consumer products industry, you probably think of partnering historically as cross-licensing and co-branding.
Right.
And if you are in the technology industry, you're thinking of partnering as having, consulting firms, GSIs, OEMs, and ISVs, right? Those are the active soup of how you partner in technology companies for the last 40 years. Whereas if you're in energy, you're probably thinking of partnering as joint ventures, because you're deploying a lot of capital to build a pipeline or to drill for something or to build massive production facilities. And so combining, capital and operational risk is something that you see a lot. So, again, and every industry has their version of where they've historically partnered, but it's been very narrowly construed. In the modern world, every company needs to reevaluate two things: how they define partnering. So it can't just be the narrow way they've defined it before. I call that little p partnering. You need to do big P partnering, and you need to shift your capital allocation strategy. Right? You need to think more and more about, where can I do shared capital?
Yeah.
Because here's what we have demonstrated for ourselves at EY, but more importantly, we've done studies that demonstrate this trend around the world. Working together, sharing capital, creates higher return on capital than deploying your capital in the traditional build or buy models in many instances. And so, and of course, if you're a business owner, ultimately, or if you if you have responsibility for running a business, if you're part of the board, if you're part of the executive management that makes those business decisions about the direction of the company, your job is to maximize, one of your jobs is to maximize the return on capital of your shareholders. And so it turns out that in the modern world, because again, the hurdle cost of partnering has come down so much that you need to rethink how you historically have allocated your capital, because partnering is going to often, not always, but often be the fastest and most direct way to returning on capital to your shareholders and investors.
Yeah.
And that's the fundamental thing that has driven, my thinking is, how do we create value for our shareholders and our clients and our employees and, society more broadly, by combining our capital with the capital of others, again, in all of its forms, not just money, and creating and unlocking value, right? Because ultimately economies grow because of innovation and unlocking new types of value, right? If companies are out there unlocking new types of value, economies don't grow, people suffer. So the value unlock that you can do in partnering models and the return on capital, which is just the reward for the value unlock, is a really important thing to do and do well. And so I know I've taken you a long distance from ecosystem to partnering, but I just want to make sure that, and again, I'm not throwing away the word ecosystem, but when I talk about ecosystem, I'm really talking about the cohort of companies that we work with predominantly and purposefully to create that higher return on capital and that value unlock by using shared capital models that are hard to do without those partnerships.
Yeah, I think it still makes sense, because I mean, a system of partnerships is just a sort of system of networks, and that's still sort of like relevant to an ecosystem and everything like that. But everything what you're saying about just rethinking sort of capital allocation, I think that having the return on capital for lowering costs with the tech benefits and everything that's happening with Moore's law, like everything is just getting crazier and cheaper and faster and better. So that's definitely interesting. So I want to ask you this. In one of your studies, you mentioned that 1/3 of organizations in the S&P Global 1200 haven't entered an ecosystem or partnership, we'll call it, since 2018. And that you can attribute some of that to like C-suite executives who have reluctance with leveraging ecosystem business models and strategies when it comes to aspects such as like their mindset, trusting partners, and then sort of sharing the spotlight. But I know one of your quotes is that the future will belong to those companies that are able to weave the ecosystem relationships into the fabric of how they create value. So my question is, what do you think is holding a lot of these organizations back, and how can executives who are facing that build, buy, or partner expansion strategy learn to adopt this ecosystem or partnering mindset and the attitude in order to find the right balance between trust and control with their partners within those business ecosystem business models?
Yeah. So you hit the right theme with mindset. When I talk to executives that have sort of reached a point where they know they need to partner more, but they feel like their company is not well positioned to do it, or doesn't have the skills to do it well.
Yeah.
The advice I give to them consistently now is there are 5 things that you need to do as a CEO or other person in decision-making authority in an organization.
Yeah.
The first thing you need to do is you need to rethink your definition of partner. So to our earlier in the conversation when I said little P versus big P partnering,
Yep.
right? And one of the reasons I wrote the 7 business ecosystem model piece was to demonstrate, look, there's lots of ways to partner.
Yep.
Those are just partnering models that repeat over and over and over again in the business world for centuries, right? And in some cases, marketplaces have been around for millennia.
Yep.
So the thing I say is, look, you need to recognize that partnering is bigger than you think it's been, and you've been partnering in a very specific corner of the definition of partnering, as opposed to thinking about partnering broadly and all of its forms. So you need to redefine. The first thing to do is you need to redefine what partnering is, and be very clear about that in your enterprise.
Mhm.
The second thing you need to do is you need to not only change your mindset, but you need to change the mindset of your entire organization. I've seen over and over again where, executives will say, we're going to do more partnering. And then they try to do it and it fails. And then they're like, well, why did it fail? It shouldn't have failed. It was,
Yeah.
and then you sort of like, oh, so hard. Maybe partnering isn't the right thing.
Yeah.
And often the reason it fails is because people in an organization have not gone through the proper change management to reorient their mindset about what their organization does, how it creates value, and then how they in each of their roles. So remember, it goes back to belief, right?
Right.
If
Right.
I'm
Right.
if I'm a sales executive or a revenue officer, and I believe that I need to control the sales process in order to generate and commit to my revenue numbers, my mindset is going to be, yeah, partnering is going to screw up my sales cycle because I'm going to lose control, right? If I'm marketing and I've spent my entire career, brand is something you need to tightly control. It's our brand. We need to protect it. The idea of sharing brand with other companies,
Yeah.
that's not something you're going to want to do,
Yeah.
right? Uh, and you can go down the line. So what you got to realize is that partnering isn't just something you do on the capital allocation side, because you can allocate the capital partner, but if your organization hasn't changed its mindset, it'll run into so much friction in every single function of the company that it will fail. So that's the second thing I say to them is, look, you've got to change the mindset of your entire organization. You got to redefine how your organization creates value, right? You're going from being a step in a value chain to being an orchestrator of value, right? Orchestration, again, is that sort of purposeful word, but it breaks the paradigm of I have suppliers, then I do my thing, and then I have distributors and I have Salesforce, right? There's a new way of thinking there. So that's the second thing is mindset. The third thing is you've got to recognize that to partner at scale, to orchestrate value, you need a function of the company that is responsible for doing that.
Yeah.
It's actually just like you have an R&D function to build and you have a corporate development function to buy, you need a partner function
I agree.
to partner, right? And that function has got to be an L0 function of the company. So a top level function of the company, similar to the finance function, the IT function, the talent function, the supply chain function, right? It is a top level. It's not a sub function of revenue or a sub function of business development or a sub function of something else. It is a separate function of the company. And until you do that, the ability to unlock scale in partnering is going to be very challenging. Then the fourth thing I tell them is, okay, well, you've got your partnering function. You also need to understand that that function is the steward of a set of business processes, right? Because partnering is a lot of work. It's one thing to say you're going to partner. It's quite another thing to do it effectively. And so partnering creates a bunch of business processes that didn't exist before, or didn't exist the way that you need them to exist before. And so the partnering function has got to create the partnering processes, both the processes that are intra-company. So how does the finance function deal with partnering? How does the sales function deal with partnering? How does the marketing function, the technology function has to build technology that's suitable for partnering, right? And down the line. So there's the business processes within your company, but then partnering by definition is multi-company. So you also need the business processes that go between your company and all your partners, right? And that's a lot of process. It's a lot of, and to enable it, you need a lot of technology. You need people, right? It's a big undertaking to make it work. And then finally, you need, the fifth thing I tell them is you need to have a way of measuring the impact and value of the partnering function.
Right, of
But
course.
most companies, partnering is viewed as an overlay, right? It's indirect revenue, but we still count direct revenue, but we track indirect revenue, or it's just not, the impact of partnering is not adequately quantified, reported in terms that are meaningful to the board, to the C-suite, to shareholders, as well as stakeholders more broadly in the company. And so you've got to structure your partnering so you're measuring the incremental value creation that you're getting from that partnering. You're measuring the return on shared capital.
Right.
You're measuring the return on the operational expense, right? Because a partnering function generates a lot of operational expense, right? You're running a function that has a lot of business processes, and those business processes cost money.
Yeah.
Right? Even your sales process, right? Your salespeople now can't just focus on selling your product to your customer. They also now need to coordinate and build relationships with and work effectively with other salespeople in different organizations to bring a joint selling process together. So just the selling process is more expensive. There's more to it when you layer in the partnering piece, and that's just one function. So there is an operational cost to partnering, and there is a capital cost to partnering. That's because now I'm deploying capital to create a net new, value proposition with two other partners. So what's the return on capital that I got from that versus my more traditional return on capital? Is that return higher on a CapEx basis? And then again, if I'm going to experience all this OpEx cost, what is the return on OpEx, the return on investment? People when they say return on investment, sometimes they mean CapEx, sometimes they mean OpEx. So I'll just say return on OpEx that I'm getting as well. And you need to measure that and report it. And then again, people that read the data need to believe the data, right? It goes back to what I said earlier.
Yeah.
Just because you say you're creating value doesn't necessarily mean people believe you're creating value. Particularly if you haven't completely changed their mindset, and also if you haven't really been very clean in structuring how you measure the incremental value of these shared partner models. So those are the 5 things that I tell executives that say, well, we need to do more partnering, but how do we do it? Because we seem to struggle. And that's the answer from my perspective, at least.
Okay. All right. No, that's very interesting. I think it segues well into this next point. In the CEO imperative that you wrote, How Mastering Ecosystems or Partnering Transforms Performance, it was discussed in the study that of over 800 business leaders that 71% of those executives believed that an ecosystem strategy was imperative to their current success, and that 90% of those quote unquote high performing ecosystems attributed their success to different factors, which was regularly reviewing with C-suite or board levels, having a function that tracks the progress through the KPIs and the ROIs, and then lastly, having a function to identify the potential partnerships. And so and earlier in another article, I think you drew a parallel between ecosystem orchestration to managing a sports team as a coach or like a captain, and that you don't necessarily need the best 11 players, but a team that works and is able to work well together according to the defined game plan towards the common goal. So with that in mind, my next question for you would be, how can organizations use tech or cloud-based solutions to help both to help both align their ecosystem alliances or strategic partnerships towards that common goal of an optimized customer value ecosystem proposition, and developing effective methods to measure the ROIs using the KPIs for different ecosystem business models.
Yeah. So when I think about the role of technology in enabling, shared capital models, partnering models, I think of it in terms of a few dimensions. First, there is the operational the technology to operate the function of partnering.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? We've invested in our company for years now, building a process maturity model. So every year we get more robust and mature and effective at the processes of partnering. We get them tighter. And then in concert over that same period, we've been building a technology stack underneath of it to digitize it, to automate it. And we've also been moving a lot of the work that can't be automated offshore into low cost shared service centers. So, you have to, the first thing you have to realize is that you're running an operation. And just like any operation, you need a technology that takes the friction out of running that operation, that automates as much as possible those processes, certainly makes them consistent and repeatable, of course. And then also the units of work that need to be done by human beings, that needs to be done as much as possible in low cost labor centers. Otherwise, the cost can get extraordinary, and you'll run into resistance. You won't be able to fund your function.
Yeah.
So there's the technology of just running the function.
Yeah.
And then you have to think of that technology, both the technology for running the function within your company, and then the technology for allowing companies to partner together across corporate boundaries. So this is the hard part. So we've, in full disclosure, I think we've done a very good job the last 6 years in building a technology stack to enable the operations and also the tracking of the financial benefits, right? So the part of the operations stack is also quantifying, tracking accurately the impact of the function, and then reporting it back up through the management information systems of the firm. So all that, I think we've done a pretty good job at, but it's the inter-company processes, right? Co-innovation, co-marketing, co-selling, co-development, right? Those things are still swivel chair, email. We are on their portal, they're on our portal.
Right. Yeah.
It is not a frictionless process. And so, one of the things that's missing in the industry generally is a platform that automates partnering. It's the digital, I call it the digital core for partnering. So we have a digital core for the finance function. It's called ERP.
Yeah.
Right. We have a digital core for the revenue function, the sales and revenue function. It's called CRM. But there are digital cores for partnering. They're called partner relationship management systems, PRMs, but none of them have become predominant. Right. They're all sort of still in early stage. They're still what I would characterize as smaller, earlier stage companies. And there's been no SAP or no Salesforce. If you think there's no company that's sort of emerged as the platform that we all adopt, or most of us adopt, which then takes the friction out of intercompany partnering processes, right? So that's the first part of looking at the technology stack. Then the other thing that I look at with technology is you need to set up your basic going away from the function of partnering to just the technology around your products and service offerings, right? That technology needs to be re-engineered to be partner model friendly, right? You need to get into public cloud and dedicated cloud models. You need to expose all of your core functions through APIs. You need to modularize what you do. You need to protect it with really good security technology that allows you to then combine your tech with other companies' tech and have shared data, but the data is still protected. Shared business processes, shared operations. If you're an automobile manufacturing company that's trying to create a mobility experience, right? You might be partnering with an insurance carrier that provides an insurance component to your vehicle. You might be partnering with a geospatial company that's providing the maps and the self-driving cars, some of the things that allow driving cars, right? You're partnering with all these companies. Your technology needs to integrate, right, with all these other technologies to create that integrated digital experience for the end customer. And if your technology stack isn't designed to allow for that integration, you're not going to be able to create that digital experience and that outcome for the end customer. So that's the other way I think about technology. You need your core technology has to be multi-company technology friendly.
Yeah.
And again, cloud is sort of, 10 years ago, that really wasn't a practical thing to do, right? But in the cloud world, both the public cloud and the dedicated cloud world now, because of these API models and the high bandwidth, low latency connections between these different clouds, et cetera, you are able, if you so choose, to build a modern technology stack that includes the characteristics of being multi-company friendly.
Right.
And not all companies have gotten there yet, and would do well to get there quickly.
Right. Yeah. 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 Have you seen some good cases? I know that you were saying that outside there's like certain industries, obviously like tech, life sciences, and telecommunications, but outside of those sort of industries, this sort of adoption to having like a sort of mature partnering model or ecosystem model is still not super off the ground. Have you seen some good cases of someone who's executing it well or anything like that, or what are they doing?
Well, I mean, look, you have certain companies that were born in cloud,
Yeah.
right? Digital natives, some people call them, where the business model and the tech stack were architected from day one,
Yeah.
with the presumption that they're orchestrating an outcome for their customer that includes something that they bring as well as something that their partners bring.
Yeah.
And so, there are lots of examples, particularly in the tech world, but I would argue that rideshare or like Uber and Lyft, for example, are born in the cloud, digital native, and they're orchestrating a lot of things, and
Yeah.
their tech was designed to do the orchestration. Um, we're also seeing traditional companies go, okay, I'm a logistics company. I need to go from, you know, effectively and efficiently just, moving containers to helping my customers optimize how they get their flow of physical and tangible goods between the locations they need to be, and take out all the friction. They shouldn't be dealing with the regulatory complexities or the legal complexities or the logistical complexities, right? Because there's a trend hitting the entire world, and we as we in our role as consumers are driving it, right? We want we don't just want to buy a product anymore. We want to buy the outcome with
Mm-hmm.
with a superior digital experience wrapped around it.
Yeah.
And I used automobiles earlier. Let's just pick on that one. So today, most of us that have automobiles still get them the old-fashioned way. We buy them,
All right. Yeah.
right? There's going to come a time in the future where the idea of buying an automobile will be very passe. And what you'll be buying is a mobility service.
Right.
right? And a mobility service might have characteristics like, you know, you have an app, of course, because everything has an app. It's a digital experience, and you know, the app, has AI in it. It knows your schedule because you've got a calendar, so it knows that you need to be certain places, certain times, and it knows where you are and where you're going to, and you can also give it additional information and context, and then it delivers for you a mobility experience that is appropriate for what you need to do. So it could be a self-driving car, could be a car that you can drive yourself. Maybe it knows that you're taking a ride up into the mountains, you're going hiking, and you want a pickup truck that weekend, but you want to drive it yourself because you still like to drive. Versus you got to go to the airport, you just want a car to pick you up and get you to the airport. You don't care if it's self-driving or has a driver. So, and the insurance is built in, and you get the type of mobility experience that's appropriate to the particular needs you have at that particular time. And it's all built into a pay-as-you-go system, right? So there's a long distance between if you're today manufacturing automobiles and tomorrow you are at the center of orchestrating mobility experiences.
Yeah.
Long distance to go. And so you're waking up and going, well, geez, to get there, I'm not going to be able to build all of the digital infrastructure and all of the underlying services that are necessary to provide that mobility experience. I'm going to need to partner to get there. And there's going to be a pretty heavy technology integration piece. There's going to be a pretty heavy risk sharing piece, et cetera, et cetera. So I've got to start to figure out these partnering models now, even though mobility experiences are probably 10 to 20 years away. If I'm not working my way there now, somebody else is going to get there before me that's not an automobile manufacturer, and I'm going to be orchestrated versus the orchestrator.
Exactly.
And that is a big part of what's starting to change in every industry. The realization that, look, the product I sell today is going to be part of a orchestrated value proposition tomorrow. The question is, am I the orchestrator, or am I going to be orchestrated into that value proposition? And I know that the orchestrator has the advantage in the market versus the orchestrated. It doesn't mean that I shouldn't have part of my business that's orchestrated and somebody else orchestrates. But if my business entirely is being orchestrated by others, I'm probably at risk for disintermediation and disruption.
Yeah.
And that's not going to sit well with my shareholders and my stakeholders more broadly.
Yeah.
So so when you say yes, all industries are waking up and realizing, look, business models are changing. And the only practical way to get to those new business models is through these shared capital partnering models. And that's why the conversations are increasing in frequency. Those of us that, have published and demonstrate proficiency in partnering, both individually and, with our companies, are increasingly seeing questions coming to us. Well, how do you do it? Why do you do it? What are the characteristics? How do you, blah, blah, blah. And so that is the trend that we're seeing. And it's also why we've been doing the studies, is to, take that sort of qualified evidence that the shift is happening and underpin it with some quantified data that also substantiates that the trend is actually happening.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So yeah, there's a lot to think about there and unpack. Because I'm just curious as to how, I mean, I guess it's sort of, there's this facilitation of something, I guess, like an arms race to be the sort of ecosystem orchestrator, because when it comes to that, there'll be sort of top level orchestration system to provide that service. Like you were saying, with the mobility as a service, you sort of have those big players. And so one thing I'm curious about is how that's going to affect sort of like competition to create the highest performing partnerships between certain organizations, and what does that look like, and then how does that also affect boundaries of organizations, because now it's sort of cross sectoral? Like does a car manufacturer, do they become sort of like a tech company, or when they're partnering, like what is their sort of role within the partnering structure? You know what I mean? What is the boundaries there?
Well, some people call that industry convergence, right? Basically redefining the core value chain and the end state value that is being consumed. So again, using automotive as an example, the automotive industry is going to be replaced by mobility industry.
Yeah.
And yes, all companies are going to become tech companies. You're not going to be able to do anything
Yeah.
without serious tech, right, at your disposal. Although you're going to consume the tech from, providers of cloud services, whether public cloud or dedicated cloud services. You're going to consume the tech. You're not going to build a lot of tech. You're going to be a consumer of tech, but most likely. But anyway, so the trick is to understand where the industry is going to be redirected, and where industries are just going to disappear and they're going to be orchestrated into other new industries. And the general thesis is that figure out what are the value outcomes that people want in their personal lives, and what are the value outcomes they want in their functions at their companies.
Mm.
Right? So if I'm Greg in my personal life, I want a healthcare, I want a wellness experience. Right? I don't want to keep going to the doctor and having the doctor say, well, we don't really have a treatment for that, or wow, it would have been good if we caught that earlier, or, I don't know who you are, but I'm just going to treat this one disease, and, it's a transaction, right? So in my personal life, I'm going to be looking for the wellness experience industry, which doesn't include just doctors, but also includes nutritionists, and it includes, other things that give me an overall wellness journey, right? So that's an example of a new industry, I'll call it, in that it goes to me, Greg, as a consumer. But then there's a me, Greg, in my function in whatever uh, company that I am performing that function in. So let's say I'm running the finance function for a big company. Okay, well, what I need a finance outcome so I can make good business decisions, right? I need to stop buying a bunch of finance tax ledgers and ERPs and financial close automation. And what I really need is a platform and a service that allow me to have all things I need to do in my finance function done in a way that I know it's being done effectively and correctly and within regulation and within policy. And I, in my function, can just focus on using my judgment and expertise to drive business performance.
Got it. Yeah.
Right. And so whether I'm thinking about my role as a person or my role as a business in a business function, increasingly I'm looking for the companies that can give me the value outcome that's important versus historically the products that they were making. That's the big shift. And the healthcare industry makes drugs, and it makes doctors,
Yeah.
and it makes health systems. It doesn't give a damn about my wellness,
Yeah.
generally speaking. There might be people within that industry that kind of care, but the reality is it doesn't. And so how do I get what I really want, which is wellness?
Yeah.
There's going to be a wellness industry.
That's
It's going to happen, right? And so who's going to get there first? And the wellness industry is going to orchestrate a lot of things. Whoever delivers that wellness outcome is not going to have all the doctors and all the hospitals and all the drugs and all the nutritionists and all the gyms and all the lifestyle travel experiences and da da da. You know, they're going to orchestrate it.
Yeah.
And who's going to be the orchestrator of each of those new value outcomes is going to be interesting to see. And again, it's going to be partnering models, right? Orchestration at its core requires shared capital and partnering at scale. And it's the companies that develop those muscles and those capabilities that are the most likely to be able to then step into those orchestration roles, or it'll be net new companies, digital natives that come in as the orchestrators and sort of disintermediate traditional value chains to create the new value chain, the orchestrated value chain.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Man, so how do you feel that, like, I know you just described a little bit how the space is going to evolve and how it's going to continue to progress and everything like that. So how do you think more so today can organizations, what kind of steps can they take to prepare themselves to stay competitive in that sort of environment that you're describing?
Every organization needs to take stock of a few things. One, is their customer, the consumer of their products and services, going to still value that at some future point, or are they going to, like I said, am I going to buy directly from a doctor, or am I going to buy from a wellness provider?
Yeah.
Right? Am I going to buy a bunch of ERP software, or am I going to buy a finance service? Right? Finance as a service. So every company's got to realize that when they think about their strategy, it's not about what new products should I be adding to my existing portfolio to incrementally take share of market, or what what innovations can I put into my products to make them more interesting or have higher margin. You need to, at least part of your calculus has got to be, where is the market going, and then where am I going, and am I going to be an orchestrator, or am I going to look to find the orchestrator but be an early participant in
Yeah.
them as the orchestrator, with them as the orchestrator, to make sure I lock in my role. It's an entirely new calculus and way of thinking at the C-suite in terms of where you take your business. Now, many of these models are not going to show up overnight, but we also have proven that, these, particularly some of these digital natives, can very dramatically disrupt, right, traditional industries by creating new value propositions that disintermediate or change the position in the value chain of traditional companies. And every time that happens, there's a good chance that your revenue and or margin are impacted, and as a result, shareholder value is impacted. So I do think if you're running a company, you've got to have a long-term strategy of where can you become an orchestrator to the new business models, and where do you need to find the orchestrator and be an early partner to that orchestrator if it doesn't make sense for you to be the orchestrator. So I think that's one sort of thing that you really need to put into your calculus. And then the other thing is, you need to realize that you're partnering today, you're little p partnering, and you're not measuring the value. You don't even know the value you're getting from it, and you're not very good at it. You need to, in anticipation of going from participating in value chains to be participating in orchestration models, again, whether the orchestrator or the orchestrated, you need to get good at partnering, big P partnering. So you need to create that partner function. You need to change your mindset. All the things I said earlier in the discussion, you need to do now, because if you aren't good at partnering 5 years from now,
it's gonna be tough.
It'd be tough. It'd be really tough.
Okay. No, I like that. It's very relevant. Yeah, no, it's exciting. It's definitely an exciting space. It's definitely interesting seeing everything like kind of happen and take place and change. And It's just a very overall very interesting subject, and I'm glad we had a little moment to kind of share this and discuss and everything like that. So I want to move on to just a little bit of wrapping up here. Last
Sure.
couple wrapping up questions. Um, uh, it's this one's a little bit off, but if you could discuss this subject with three people, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
3 people, dead or alive. Yeah, it's a tough one. I, I like to talk about this with everybody. Um, I would say, certainly if I think about the social implications of it, right? Partnering at scale it isn't just a business issue, it's an overall social issue because some of the things that we're going to have to overcome in terms of um, societal disruption, uh, whether we like it or not, we have climate change, and sure we can do things to reduce carbon emissions, but it's not going to. I personally don't think it's going to put much of a dent in climate
Yeah.
change. There's going to be a lot of disruption. So how do we, using these partnering models between private enterprise and governments,
Mm,
minimize the impact of these disruptions? So I think I would probably want to talk to, the president of the United States, maybe a few world leaders,
yeah.
say, guys, this isn't just a business imperative. It is an overall governance and infrastructure imperative. The infrastructure of the future isn't going to be, well, we pay a lot of tax dollars and then our version of a Congress or a Senate, figures out how we're going to allocate those dollars to build. This is going to be, and then we bid it out. And then, like that model isn't going to get it done. The pace of change and the rate at which we're going to need to deploy new infrastructure is, and the way we're going to have to change, the flow of goods and services, everything's going to have to change pretty radically. So it'd probably be a few of the top world leaders that I'd want to talk to,
Mm,
because I think that that's an important concept for them as well.
definitely. No, I agree. I agree. No, I think that's a great point. I think that's a great point. Um, okay. Here, what's one thing that you're most proud of accomplishing in your life up until now? It can be anything.
Well, I think from a business perspective, I think, the when I took my role, I was very trepidatious about it.
Mm,
I didn't have the view of it that I have today. Back then, I was like a lot of people. I believed that, this was a indirect revenue. It was not going to be valuable or valued. And, I think the work that we've done as a team in my organization over the last 6 years has not only had a really positive impact on my current company, but has also advanced sort of the overall thinking about partnering. So I think that's been something I'm very proud of. And I'm actually in the process of working on a book to write about it. So some of the topics that we talked about in this will certainly be in a much more structured way in the book. Um, you know, on a personal basis, I'm proud of the fact that I have 3 wonderful children, adult children now, who give me joy and um, make me happy to see that they have come into this world and are finding their path and enjoying the gift of being able to breathe oxygen and drink water and exist on this planet, right? Because it is a gift, and you make the most of everything you can when you're here. So I think from a personal perspective, it's my relationships and my family that have been the most rewarding for me.
that's great. That's great. And yeah, I know that's interesting with the book. I know because you've been pretty early just on this sort of idea and subject for a while. I know like when I was reading back some of your stuff early, like 2020, 2021 and everything like that. So I'm definitely looking forward to see more of that. And then on a personal level as well. That's great. With the family, are they around? Are they local to sort of like where you're at? Are they kind of like spread out or like
They're well, it's like the modern world. No one lives all in the same town anymore.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, some people do have that blessing, but
Yeah.
for many of us, we live in different cities, but we're all mobile and we all get to see each other fairly regularly. So that's the important thing. And then, of course, we've got things like this the video conferencing capability where we can see each other and talk to each other, which makes a difference as well.
All right. So just wrapping up here, I just want to ask one final question is, where can we find you? I know you mentioned the book is coming up. That's an exciting project. Where can we find out more about what it is that you're doing and, services? I know UI and everything like that, but where can we find you and where can we connect with you?
Most of the things that I've published in my EY role are on ey.com/alliances. And if you want to read particularly the studies or the big P partnering, the 7 ecosystem business models, you can find that pretty easily there. I also publish a lot on LinkedIn. Sometimes it's EY stuff. Sometimes it's just my own personal views. I am actually coming to the end of my EY tenure.
Oh, wow.
Partners have a due by date. So my due by date is coming up. I think I mentioned I was born 60 years ago. It'll be in November. It'll be my 60th birthday. So
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'll be moving on to my next professional endeavor. I haven't decided yet what that is, but
Okay.
it'll probably involve ecosystems and partnering is my guess. Although not necessarily. There are other things I'm looking at as well. So we'll see.
What do you feel? What's brewing?
I've done a lot of professional services in my career, so unlikely I would do any professional services next. I think a natural fit for me because I'm a technologist and I've done a lot of this is in a technology company. There's a number of roles that I'm suited for in a technology company, but also if I were to find one of these companies that's realizing, oh my Lord, our industry 10 years from now, 15 years from now is going to be replaced by this other sort of value proposition. I need to get there and I need somebody that can help drive us there and build this partnering and orchestration function. That's not a tech company. That would be an interesting thing to look at as well. But those are not things that are advertised in because the jobs don't really exist yet, right?
Yeah. You're too visionary. My man's too
I'm
visionary.
ahead of the curve, right? So those are some of the things I'm looking at. But I'm also looking at doing consulting and advisory work. So there's a lot of things on the table. But you can always find me on LinkedIn. That's the one thing for sure.
All right, great. Okay, great. Well, listen, Greg, Mr. Sarafin, I appreciate you taking the time today to meet and speak with me. This was just a very enlightening and fascinating conversation. You have a bunch of wisdom and knowledge, and overall, it was just very exciting. So I just want to thank you again for taking the time to meet with me and speak today. And yeah.
My pleasure. It's good to meet you, and I enjoyed the conversation. And wish you a lot of success in this podcast series and whatever you do professionally going forward.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I'll let you know. I'll keep you posted. I'll keep you posted with the uploads and everything like that. I'll send it to you beforehand. And but that's about it from me.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate the time.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.
See you.